one of the problems a lot of people have with getting into comics, superhero comics right now, is that where do you start? Because there's just so much. For example, look at the different Batman titles. There's so many different Batman titles, and he's been taken in different directions. You have the Dark Multiverse, you have Batman, the future Batman, you have Batman Now, you have different storylines. And the same thing with Superman. Is this a real thing? That's something that's going to actually hold on to? So a lot of people don't know where to go. Whereas you go to a manga, they have the whole story collected in one volume, and it even tells you the number to go to. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So it's a pretty straightforward.
You can make that argument for superhero comics because you have a whole bunch of trades out there. You can say, hey, read this trade. This is one that came over.
No, because the trades are not coming in order because they're grouped in the trades.
If you get the New 52 Batman, and that's one of the things that people like, you can buy 1, 2, 3, 4,
right,
5.
in the New 52. But I'm just saying that there's just still so many different inclinations.
If you pick the one, then you can get to the.
It's a perception. I think it's a perception problem more than anything else. I don't disagree with you that a lot of people feel, because I've heard people ask this before. If I want to read Superman, where should I start? I don't think anybody says that. Look, I want to read Naruto. Where should I start? Right there, Volume 1.
That's it. Exactly.
Read Naruto.
You go straight there.
But the bigger problem is that superhero comics and manga comics are two different entities when it comes down to that. You don't have a Naruto, and then you have a Naruto, the Boy of Speed, Naruto, all these different volumes and
variations.
And why? Because Naruto is its own thing, whereas Superman or Spider-Man are trying to do what? They're literally holding up, an entire company. It's like these are gateway characters. If you make them, I think if you remember more that they're gateway characters and have books and have stories where you can come in, like I started reading Iron Man when Iron Man became Rhodey. Okay, I was very interested in that story. I stayed a little bit longer after it was done, but I didn't stay on. I pretty much dropped the book at some point after that. And then I came back, here and there if I saw Rhodey in the suit, because that was the reason why I started reading the book. I wasn't reading it for Tony Stark. Now, I didn't dislike Tony Stark or dislike Iron Man, but that's why I was reading it. So that's not a gateway character, That's not a gateway story. A gateway story, for me with Marvel was Spider-Man. Because I can read Spider-Man, and Spider-Man, regardless of everything that may have been going on in Web of Spider-Man, I can sit down and read Amazing, and I can enjoy Amazing or not enjoy Amazing based on that. I didn't have to go over here and read a crossover with the X-Men or anything of that nature to find out what was going on. And eventually, if I did drop the book, I dropped it because I just wasn't interested in the stories any longer. That, I think, is missing from a lot of comics, especially with your gateway characters. I'm not talking about Black Canary or Green Arrow or or John Constantine for that matter. Those guys can pretty much do whatever the hell they want because the guys who read that, they're coming specifically for this character. But how do you get them to that character? You need the guys you need to be able to come into a Superman story or a Batman story or a Spider-Man story. I used to say X-Men, but that's just not going to happen. But you need to be able to come into those, and then eventually what? You have Spider-Man. Who's guest starring in Spider-Man? The Incredible Hulk is guest starring in Spider-Man. When you get to see him interact, you're like, I'm interested in reading some more of this character, and that way you can actually branch out. They don't really do that anymore.
But they also miss the fact that a lot of the comics now aren't geared, and they're definitely trying geared for younger viewers. I mean, younger audience. So the complexity and the relationships, and now the comic code, they're not even using some of those things too.
See, I'm going to disagree with you there.
And I think that the problem there is that. They're not selling them in schools sometimes. They're not selling them like you have Scholastic, and you see all these other comics that are selling even things that are not even exactly comics, but books that have a lot of animation, a lot of art in it, and people are buying those and they're being more geared to us. They're still selling comics, but just a different audience is getting them. So you disagree with what?
In terms of pushing towards kids, I remember one of the better things that we had growing up is that you had these 100-page giants. It was $1, and it was 100 pages. And again, this is before guys were like, I got to put this in a plastic bag and put this away. This may be worth some money. You might have read it I had a copy of Incredible Hulk 181. I must have read that I don't know how many times. I turned that book over, read it. I don't know where it is now. Wish I had it. I don't know where it is now, but I read that book so many different times. It's a different dynamic with comics. It's a different dynamic with comics. One, they're too expensive. Two, there is not enough page count, for a kid. I mean, seriously, you give a kid here's this manga book right over here. Here's a comic book. The comic book is 20 pages and out. You got to come back next month. The manga book is what, over 100 pages? Well over 100 pages, and the price is usually, comparable at the end of the day. And so, you know,
$10
this is
for 100 pages.
this
yeah,
is the
so-
better buy. I thought DC did a good job when they started. Okay, we're going to do the 100-page giants again. We're going to have them as Walmart exclusives. We're going to reprint material, so we're saving money. We're not, we can reprint an entire book of 100 pages for like 10 cents.
Yeah.
You know, we can do that right over there, and we're going to make money hand over fist, and we get people reading. And the stories they chose. Okay, in those 100-page giants, I was looking at them. These are some of the better stories. These were stories you could get into, like, you know, quick Supergirl saga or a Batman Hush, stuff that was great, and you can come over here and you can read it. It's easy to get into. I'm thinking of that Batman storyline, like Hush. See, that's a perfect thing to get people reading Batman. Perfect. You come into the first issue, okay, it's a totally different setup. You got Catwoman in there, so you have some like love interest stuff going on. And what did he do? Jeff Loeb did the greatest hits. He's like, here I'm gonna have him fighting Killer Croc. Here I'm gonna have him fight Catwoman, Poison Ivy. Okay, when he fights Poison Ivy, I'm gonna have Superman guest star, so there's gonna be a nice little dust up here. It was that you could give that to any kid, and by the end of it, they would feel that they have a good enough knowledge to go a bit more forward. Now you come in here, hey kid, start reading this. Oh, this is Superman. He revealed the secret identity. What the, where am I supposed to go from here? The story's over, right? He doesn't have a secret identity. Sorry, one last thing. The other thing that I think they're also forgetting, these were wish fulfillment characters. Okay, so you took that away. Any kid who would read this and say, okay, this is like, Superman's like me. Okay, well, people think I'm ordinary, but inside I've got all this stuff going on, and if, when I open this, that's what everybody's gonna see one day. You took all that away when you took the secret identity away. Okay, when you can no longer write that as wish fulfillment, where people want to be these characters, not this stuff, I relate to them, that bullshit. You want to be this character. As embarrassing as that may sound, you want to be this character, and that's what attunes you to them. When you take that away, what's the sense in it any longer? Kids aren't going to be into that.
So what do you think? What are you talking? What do you think?
Think about what?
But what he just said.
I'm saying you're asking me. Look at this.
We're having fun.
You brought up manga and saying the whole build of manga is so different from comic books and the audience that it pulled in. Mm-hmm. Now, someone like Frank Miller, an artist, they were going to see what they were doing and how they were handling storytelling. But the whole market of manga is going to be way different. And the comic book industry was very, even though at the same time in the 90s it was pretty big and about to crash, it was a different sort of audience because they weren't looking at comic books and running and say, oh, I'm going to get Jim Lee's X-Men at the same time. They were like, I'm buying all these phone books of manga and enjoying that. But you're saying that because there's, 1,000 issues of Superman and comparing that to 7 to 8 issues is like, at some point, if you're interested in the books, you might buy them. Maybe the superhero angle is something that's keeping them out, but it's harder to compare saying why these are doing well and why these aren't.
I think it's a very simple thing.
I think it's the same. You can't really compare the two.
At the con, they had a panel where they were talking about manga. Manga and superheroes were like 10% of the market when you compare that relative to manga and juvenile comics. So that's like 41% of the market. So you're talking about a huge slice of the market. Nearly 50% of the market is.
But you're saying there's a market there, not saying why that audience isn't going to buy superheroes.
But I'm saying.
And then they can always go buy Image comic books and all the weird stuff that's there, but they're not going there and doing that.
Because probably one, the format is the complete story. Two, the fact that they can go somewhere with the story that they're having there. Clearly.
You have Walking Dead, right?
Yes.
And Walking Dead has your 1 to what?
But it's a serious
compendium volumes, if you want to buy
right.
those.
But I'm saying that's one.
But that doesn't happen for anything else, and Image does a multitude of other different types of comic books.
And you're right about that.
And they don't jump on and say, you know what? It's not superheroes, but in this format, they're like, no.
Right.
So
but what I'm saying is that you have the issue.
Comparing the two.
That you can compare it to because they're basically in the same marketplace. Well, let's look at it.
They're both comics. Yes, they're both comic books. You can compare them, but
the audience.
And then can we get back to Bash and Bendis?
Right. So the audience that we're looking at right now is a young audience. This is going to be the audience that's going to be reading the comics in the future. Those are the guys that you want to go after. Right now, as you can clearly see, the audience in comic stores are much older than the average comic book reader when you look at the younger kids, and particularly the manga. So what's going on there?
But comic books, they took themselves out of the newsstand. That's where any little kid would come on and say, Daddy, Mommy, just get me this. And they like, shut up. And then they buy it for them. And they sit back. I want to go to the supermarket. I used to get my comics from the supermarket. But you can't always go to the
newsstand, corner store.
And then when you get the back issue as a kid, it's like, here, I'm pulling out X-Men 132. And it's like that has no beginning or end to it. But when you read it, it's like, oh, it was inclusive. I understood what was going on. There was something that happened before that I didn't know, but it was like, I could get the whole point of this story here.
Yes.
And going in and saying I need to know what the first one is like at the same time I had before that X-Men 138, and I was like, oh, now I got to get 137 issues of X-Men because I like this one so much. But you can, and at the same time, you go the same with Spider-Man. And at some point over time, I would, you get the phone books came much later, but you're slowly picking up books as you go along. What, you don't call the phone?
I don't call them phone books.
The
no.
black and whites.
I've had my issues with manga in terms of color, and some of the styles of the art. So I'm not even going to deny that, But at the same
so that's
time,
what I'm saying. There's a different audience.
Yeah, but it's a different audience.
For the same sort of subject.
And if you check out color, much cheaper to produce.
Right. Yeah. So when you have one of the reasons DC's successful hits was Superhero Girls. Where they've done very well with those comics.
Well,
and
it's
the shows
successful with kids.
But
successful with kids.
But the point I'm trying to make is that
how many? There's only like one book.
But I'm just trying to say that
comes out
if
periodically.
you don't get those people, younger kids, to come in, and this is one of the reasons why Marvel did that whole diversity kick and with a younger crowd.
And
is that
failed.
And failed because you need to get younger people in. If we started reading comics when we were kids, we wouldn't have been reading these comics.
We would have never read these comic books, regardless of what was going on inside, because there would have been a big impediment from us reading that. And you know what the impediment is?
What?
The price tag. Okay, comic books there's a big jump from 60 cents to $4. Okay, you've made it to the point that's an adult who can buy that. That's an adult who can buy it, not a kid.
So that's who they're choosing as their audience. That's what I'm trying to say.
They don't have a choice because 1986, DC made it. Look, we want to get that older market because they were seeing money coming from Batman the Dark Knight, not so much Crisis, but Batman the Dark Knight and Watchmen. Okay, and they would have that on those books. DC Comics aren't just for kids. And then they kept pushing that to the point, the kids got excluded. Okay, and the storylines, I'm going to go kill Robin. Yeah, every kid wants to read that story.
Yeah,
okay, true. Robin that was the kid. And the thing with DC that's always scratching my head, DC was the home of the child superhero. Mm-hmm. DC was the home of the kid who was like, hey, I can go out adventuring with these guys and one day I'm going to grow up and be them. And they've got, no, we got child endangerment in a fictional world? Mm-hmm. So you seeded all of that ground. Marvel I can understand because Marvel was never going after that. Marvel was more like, hey, we want the teenagers. Our stories are going to be a little bit more, along those lines. But DC was no. Mm-hmm. DC was like 8 years old, going up. You could have those particular characters, and you had those, guys come in. And they seeded all of that ground. They raised the price. We want to have more mature storytelling. We want to have this. I'm like, but what about the kids? What? And then you raise the price, you change the whole stories, and now you're wondering why you're 10% of the market. And even that, for me, I think is pretty fallacious because the market itself is much bigger than what they try to present.
But they're showing the market is bigger. You're right because you have the manga comics, you have the juvenile comics geared towards juveniles. You have independents, so they're also including the Image and all those type of things. So yeah, it is much bigger. But if you're only getting 10% of the pie, unless you're one company, that's not really working. And if you're not growing. And as we can see, the comic book sales have been very stagnant for the last couple of years. They're only going 2% a year,
well,
and all this is because they're only doing a lot of these crazy what ifs, these one shots, and this goes back to Bendis.